All right, have you ever seen this? An organization with these picture-perfect cybersecurity policies, binders full of them, that just crumbles under any real pressure? It's a huge problem, and that's exactly the dangerous gap we're talking about today, the one between paper and reality. So in this explainer, we're going to dive into how you bridge it and turn those policies into a real, breathing, effective system.
So here's our game plan. First, we're going to really nail down that core problem, that gap between what's on paper and what actually happens. Then we'll introduce the FastTrack model as the solution. We'll walk through its four main phases, talk about why it's so much more than a simple checklist, and finally, we'll see how this whole thing helps you build a real competitive edge.
Okay, let's get right into that central challenge. You see it all the time. Organizations that look fantastic on paper. They've got all the right frameworks, all the right documents. But when a real crisis hits, a serious cyber attack or some big disruption, the whole system just fails. That disconnect between policy and actual performance, that's the governance gap.
This slide just lays it out perfectly, doesn't it? On the left, you've got the paper system. It looks good, sure, but it's often fragmented, with all these isolated components that are actually hiding some deep-seated issues. But on the right, that's the goal, a living system, one that's truly resilient and actually performs when things get tough. That space between them, that's where all the vulnerability lives.
So the big question is, how do we bridge that gap? Well, that's where the DVMS FastTrack model comes in. Think of it as a practical, no-nonsense pathway to turn those paper policies into real-world strength.
Now, what's really crucial here is that this isn't just another complicated framework to stack on the pile. The FastTrack model is a roadmap. It's a how-to guide. It helps organizations put a real digital value management system in place by taking these manageable, iterative steps. It's all about making real, steady progress, one step at a time.
And the model guides you through this journey with four very distinct phases. It's designed to take an organization from, just getting organized all the way to a point where resilience is actually a tool for innovation. So here are the four phases at a glance: initiate, basic hygiene, expand, and innovate. This is the core path, right? You're going from laying a solid foundation to achieving a state where you're constantly improving. Let's break down what each one really means. So, phase 0, initiate. I love this. It's sometimes called getting ready to get ready. And that's honestly the perfect description. This is where you lay all the groundwork. You figure out who's responsible for what, you get a handle on where you're starting from with risk assessments, and you set the stage for the big cultural shift that's absolutely necessary for this to work.
Okay, next up, phase 1, basic hygiene. The goal here is pretty simple: stabilize your environment. This means you're putting in place those essential, non-negotiable practices. We're talking about patch management, identity controls, and just knowing what your critical assets are and making sure they're protected. Doing just this step reduces so many common risks and starts building real confidence. All right, once you've got that stable foundation, you're ready for phase 2, expand. This is where you shift gears from just stabilizing to actually optimizing. You mature your assurance practices, which is really just a way of saying you're verifying that your controls are actually working. You strengthen governance across the whole organization, and you start broadening your protection to cover more systems and even your supply chain. And that brings us to the final phase, innovate. This is where the organization makes a really powerful shift. Resilience stops being just a defensive thing and starts becoming a source of competitive advantage. The culture really embraces this idea of continuous feedback and learning, which lets the whole organization adapt and just thrive. Now, this is so important to get. This whole four-phase journey, it is not a rigid one-way street. It is iterative. For instance, say you're working in the expand phase on your supply chain, and you suddenly discover a weakness in your identity controls. Well, that discovery sends you right back to strengthen your basic hygiene. It's a continuous loop of improvement, which is exactly how real organizations work. So we've seen the what and the how, but it's really important to understand that this model is so much more than just a sequence of steps. Let's talk a little bit about the philosophy that makes it so powerful. And here is where you see the practical magic of this model. You've probably heard of the NIST cybersecurity framework, right? It's the gold standard for what to do. Well, FastTrack provides the how. You can see right here how the first phases line up perfectly with govern and identify. The expand phase maps to protect and detect, and the innovate phase aligns with respond and recover. It makes the NIST framework something you can actually do.
The traditional way of doing things in security and development has always been sequential. You build something new, and then you try to figure out how to protect it. Security is almost always an afterthought, something bolted on at the very end. The FastTrack model just flips that whole idea on its head. The philosophy here is to create and protect at the same time. Protection isn't some separate step that happens at the end. It's woven into the process of creating value from the very beginning. This is a massive and incredibly powerful shift in thinking. So after all this, what does it all lead to? Why would you go on this journey? And the answer isn't just better cybersecurity. It's about real, tangible business results and building a competitive edge that lasts. Here's the real payoff. When you follow this model, you're building an organization that can stay stable even when things go haywire. You're delivering trust to your customers, to your partners. You're satisfying regulations, not as a chore, but just as a natural result of doing things right. And ultimately, you're turning something that's often seen as just a cost, cybersecurity, into a genuine competitive advantage.
This quote from Rick Lemieux at the DVMS Institute really nails it. The goal is to bust cybersecurity out of its technical silo and weave it into the very fabric of how the entire business is governed and how it operates.
And so that leaves us with a big question to think about for your own organization. Are you just checking boxes, just managing compliance? Or are you actively building a truly resilient system that creates a real, lasting competitive advantage? That's the powerful shift this model makes possible. Thanks for watching.